Welcome back, everybody. My name is Ben Furmage, and it's great to welcome everyone to get together again at a national level. We'll shortly be crossing to our Chief Research Officer, Bryony Rogers, and our second keynote speaker, Billie Giles-Corti. But before we do, I thought I'd provide some reflections and observations on how we got to this point as a platform for some of the conversations that will happen later in this conference. And I take everybody back to 2011. It was a time where many parts of the country were still recovering from record low rainfalls and a drought that was unprecedented. But at the same time, some parts of the country were also dealing with high rainfalls and floods. So, we had some parts of the country scratching their heads, wondering how do we respond to almost a continuous step down in storage levels, but at the same time others experiencing floods. We needed urban centres that would work well when there was too much water and not enough, when there was floods and droughts. And at the same time, we were also thinking about how do we keep our cities livable with growing populations. We'd seen the impact of restrictions on the livability of some of our cities, and we were saying how do we have more dense, larger cities that were also great places to live, work and raise a family. And finally, we were also seeing the impact of the significant investment in infrastructure that was so important during the Millennium Drought to shore up our water supply systems. The impact on customer bills of that significant investment was starting to be felt in people's hip pockets. So all of that was starting to lead people to ask the question, are the approaches that have served us so well in the past, are they enough to serve us as effectively in the future? These sorts of conversations were happening at a state, at a national, and even an international level. And people were saying we need to find ways to use all sources of water more effectively. We need to find a way of getting better integration of our green, blue and grey solutions through a deeper level of engagement between water planning and urban planning. And we also need to leverage the experience of the Millennium Drought in terms of the power of an engaged, informed and passionate community. We saw the response that community had in saving water, but also too in helping us manage floods. And so we're starting to learn the important role that community can play in preparing for major events, in responding to those major events, and then in recovering to them as well. These things all became known as key foundations of a water-sensitive city. And so there was a push to move, not just to talk about what needed to be done and why it needed to be done, but there was a need to move from why to how. And, that's a complicated issue, but it also led to the formation of a CRC bid. That's what CRCs are all about. It's about bringing best of academic thinkers, bringing industry experience and throwing that at a significant problem for real impact. And for this particular case, there was a desire to build on the experience of 20 years of urban water research, including a number of successful CRCs, but to add a more significant, multidisciplinary approach, something that could embrace the full complexity of the urban system. I think there was an agreement that it was not part of the urban system for water management that then needed to change. We needed to look at the whole thing. And so a small group of thought leaders from some of our leading academic institutions, led by Tony Wong, started a mission, a water-sensitive cities mission. They rallied people from 62 different organisations, and together they started a water-sensitive bid and a water-sensitive journey. And the way that bid was put together would set the tone for the next 9 years. It was bold. It was looking to wrap its arms around the full complexity of urban water management. It was bringing together multiple disciplines, multiple jurisdictions, and advocating for action on multiple scales. It would also accelerate the research program, front-loading the research efforts so that we would have more time at the back end of the CRC for application and translation of the knowledge that resulted. It was also integrated. There are a lot of workshops and a lot of effort bringing together people that were, deeply experienced, seriously smart, and, well known and respected in their areas to coalesce around an agreed and integrated platform and an agreed program of four different areas of inquiry for that first tranche of research. And that initial program was locked in before the CRC started, which meant that it could hit the ground running. And then finally, as well as being bold and integrated, it was fueled by a genuine sense of passion. Very different people from different backgrounds and different points of view coming together for a desire to see research translate into impact on the ground. All of that meant that the bid was successful, and on the 24th of September 2012, the CRC for Water Sensitive City was launched in Melbourne. On the 25th, it was launched in Brisbane, and on the 27th of September 2012, it was launched in Perth. Action in 3 states across multiple dimensions. And you could see that the governance was lined up. There was a fair bit of it, reflecting the breadth of aspiration and the scale of activity. And as I said, all of that work before the bid meant that it could hit the ground running. And within 12 months, there was 30 ambitious research projects underway. They'd released 62 publications, and there'd been 26 events and seminars in that first 12 months. That momentum was to continue over future years, and it would see things like the research synthesis, a flagship of the CRC, taking research insights and applying them to specific locations and supporting people in those locations to move forward challenging issues. At the halfway point of the CRC, there was a review. The Commonwealth came in and did a very detailed and forensic review of the progress the CRC was making, and the team passed with flying colours. As part of that review, they updated the tool that they used to estimate the impact of CRCs. And as a result of that update and the early progress of the team, they doubled the expected impact to $343 million over a 15-year period, expressed in PV terms. With the application and the completion of Tranche 1 and the deep commencement of Tranche 2, that estimate was updated again, and it was further doubled. And moving to Tranche 2, it continued the themes of being bold, working in an integrated way, and being fueled by a passion for research impact. I think it's fair to say that the boldness is reflected in the fact that after consulting for 18 months with more than 120 organisations, we narrowed the focus of the CRC from the all-encompassing complexity of the first tranche to something that was targeted on industry-identified issues that were essential for moving forward on the water-sensitive city mission. Holy grail issues that had been pursued by organisations, both academic and industry, for many years. And so, that, again, though, they were integrated across, and you'll see some examples of that in a second. A key theme of our second tranche was making sure that research translates into useful tools, and then combined with local influence, those tools are applied for impact. And there's lots of examples of that happening. For example, in our first integrated research program, IRP1, led by Bryony Rogers, a key output of that was 6 water-sensitive cities and transition strategies are located around the country, from the wet tropics of the north to the arid and temperate zones further south and west. But importantly, those strategies were much more than documents. They brought together a group of people and created a movement. People from very different jurisdictions, very different organisations, very different technical backgrounds, to align on a shared history, to explore and set an agreed vision, and to lock in priority areas for action that would build momentum for genuine impact. And it's been great to see those strategies and the communities of practice around them continue to drive application through regulation, legislation, policy and practice. And as well as all of that, some important tools are coming out of that program as well, and a classic example of that is the Water Sensitive Cities Index. Fueled and driven by Chris Chesterfield, it's had a significant rollout now. We've had more than 50 applications of the Water Sensitive Cities Index, and we've got people trained in more than 11 countries now, providing a basis for not just city-to-city learning within Australia, but city-to-city learning at an international scale. IRP2, tackling one of the key holy grail issues of how do we build the business case for a water-sensitive city approach, and how do we have a better conversation around who pays for that approach. It's another example of where research insights have been translated into useful tools, supported by training, and are now being applied at a large scale around the country and internationally. I remember when I spoke to Syed Iftikhar, the leader of IRP2, he told me that the values tool had over 300 values included in it, and I thought that was very impressive. It now has over 2,000 values in it, providing a really important resource for people trying to quantify the benefits of a water-sensitive city. And it's also been great to have the support of Professor Dave Pennell in applying the Infuse tools internationally. Just last week, the World Bank released a report that's focused on bringing together green, grey and blue solutions for more integrated flood management, but it has the Infuse toolkit at its centre, providing opportunities to not just influence thoughts, but start to influence development pipelines of investment literally worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So a great chance there for impact at scale. Another major holy grail was this integration of water and urban planning. And we've had Chris Chesterfield lead IRP3 and Steve Kenway lead IRP4 in bringing together the insights and providing some very useful frameworks and guidance on how to bring together planners from both water and the urban sphere to have a deeper conversation around genuine integration of water as a key driver of livability in local places. We've seen that demonstrated through case studies and through the support of the Christian Urick and his TAPS team. We've now got tools that can help people better understand their water cycle and experiment and explore alternative applications for applying water-sensitive city principles in their location. It's about bringing the theory to life in a really visual way that can help translate a water-sensitive city principles into a practical reality. IRP5, based in the West, but obviously of interest to people in other parts of the country as well. It's a great illustration of the role the CRC can play in bringing together trusted experts to get traction on a really difficult issue. We've seen this process bring together that expertise to get a shared understanding of the history, what's contested, what's agreed, and what are the areas of focus as we start to use what we've got to make best bet decisions, as Greg Clayton would say, but also to start to shape up the research program that can inform more deeper knowledge bases for better decisions into the future. And I've talked a lot about the application of CRC insights and the generation of knowledge within Australia, but the bid said that it was a global aspiration that it had. And there's certainly many examples of Australia taking its experience to the world through the CRC. We've worked in more than a dozen countries, either working with governments directly or working through development agencies. And a great example of that is the work that Tony Wong and Jianbin Wang have led in Kunshan in China. They've applied water-sensitive city principles to large-scale, city-scale infrastructure, to precincts and to innovative lot-scale solutions, and looking at Internet of Things platforms to start to help inform better management across scales and over time. Importantly too, this work has also provided a way of connecting governments, providing opportunities for our government and at various levels and to engage with other governments, and to open doors and provide opportunities for new markets for some of our industry partners. We've also harvested the knowledge of this experience to bring back to Australia, but also to work with development organisations to share those insights and advocate for a water-sensitive city approach globally. Again, not only building connections inside Australia, but building global connections, because these are global issues that we're wrestling with. But no quick summary can do justice to the breadth and depth of effort and insight and work that's been done together over the last 9 years. But I thought a few numbers might help colour the experience and the evidence base, I guess. We've delivered 36 research projects involving more than 300 researchers and more than 20 different disciplines. We've released over 1,700 publications. That's more than 3 a week over the nine years. It's included academic publications, but as well as industry-facing guidelines and industry notes and those sorts of things as well. All focused on harvesting the insights and getting them out in a decision-useful form. We've had 5 conferences. This is our 5th, and it's been great seeing the evolution of those conferences, starting with researchers talking about what's possible, then researchers talking about how the insights are starting to emerge from the research, and then talking about how that insight is being applied, and it's industry that's been talking about the application of those research insights. Now we're talking about scaling up that as a mainstream and a business usual activity. We've also had more than 700 events. That's 1 a week, and it's been really important to keep that connection between researchers and industry, so that researchers are responding to really clear industry challenges, and when that research is done, there's a really effective pipeline for application and impact, keeping that sort of impact going. Also too, the efforts haven't gone unnoticed. Both projects and people have received national and international awards. And this has been both recognition of our most senior leaders at a national, state and international level, as well as emerging leaders. And when you see emerging leaders being recognised and combining that with the volume of PhDs that are coming out of this CRC, you can be confident that the next generation of technical and organisational leadership and community leadership is there to support the continuation of the CRC mission. And as we've been getting close to the end of the CRC, we've been starting to bring the threads together through a series of integrated case studies, which you'll hear more about in the coming sessions. Also through the Water Sensitive Cities platform, providing an easy way for people to dip into that significant reservoir of knowledge and experience that's been accumulated over the last 9 years. And again, you'll hear a little bit more of that in the coming days. And we'll also have a webinar following this conference to launch our think tank piece on transformative cities, setting an agenda for the next wave of water-sensitive city insights and application. Also too, I guess there's our proudest achievement has been our networks, the people. Really, the people that will drive the application at scale and the mainstreaming that everyone's looking for. I started by talking about the need to move from an understanding of what needed to change and why, and a need to move to how. Well, we now know how. We've got proof of concepts, applying water-sensitive tools, principles, practices at scale around the country in a whole bunch of different situations. And so I think there are many ways of advancing that mission and scaling it up through mainstreaming, one of which is through the Water Sensitive Cities Institute. Our partners have told us they want to keep going, but they want to recognise that mainstreaming is a state-based activity but needs to be nationally connected. They also want to make sure that there's support there to continue to foster the development of IP, the application of that IP, train future leaders, and then provide a vehicle for collaborative research into the future. So stay with us. There will be, following this conference, there'll be a series of workshops Just like this CRC started with a series of workshops providing an opportunity to explore and come up with an integrated way forward, we'll do that for the next wave through the Water Sensitive Cities Institute. There'll be more information following the workshop. I started by saying that we need to move from not only what, but to how. And and as the CRC is coming to an end, while the CRC is finishing, the Water Sensitive Cities mission is not. We have in our back pocket the how now. We just need to continue to apply it because the issues that started the CRC, climate change, population growth, better management of scarce economic reserves, they're still with us, and they're even more important. What is different now is that we know what to do in response. We know how to respond. We know how to get a better outcome. And also too, I'd encourage people to, in thinking about that, to continue to be bold, to continue to be integrated and collaborate across different technical disciplines, institutions and jurisdictions to get that integration, and to use that reservoir of passion to continue to push for more water-sensitive cities, cities that are sustainable, livable, prosperous and resilient to the challenges that are awaiting us in the future. So there you have it, just a quick tour of the last 9 years. I'm sure everyone has their own observations, and we look forward to sharing those over the coming weeks and months. It's been a great pleasure working with the CRC, and I guess I just want to say to you all, thank you for your attention today and for your support over the last 9 years. We'll now pass to Bryony Rogers, our Chief Research Officer, for our second keynote with Billie Giles-Corti. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and a very big welcome to you for our first keynote of the day, our keynote session for the day, which will be presented by Professor Billie Giles-Corti. In terms of format, Billie will be speaking for about half an hour, and then we'll have time afterwards for a few questions. Professor Billie Giles-Corti is a distinguished professor and a Vice-Chancellor's Professorial Fellow at RMIT University, where she leads the Healthy Livable Cities Group in the Centre for Urban Research. Billie is a world-leading researcher on the impact of the built environment on health and well-being. She's in the top 1% of researchers in her field globally, and with many other accolades to her name. In the last 2 decades, Billie has led multidisciplinary teams working on major national platform initiatives that have made significant advances in our understanding and evidence of what makes cities healthy and great places to live. She's influenced livability and public health policy in many government agencies around Australia through technical advisory roles and membership of key committees and panels. Billie, we're so pleased you've been able to join us, and we're looking forward to hearing your reflections on the future for healthy, livable cities and what the role the water industry can play. Thanks, Billie.
Great. Thank you so much, Bryony, and thank you for this opportunity. And it was great hearing just what a remarkable organisation and achievements of the Water Sensitive Cities CRC. What a fabulous undertaking it has been, and such important work. I'm going to talk about the role of the water industry, but I know that you'll be sitting there, and I know that you know already that there's an important role for the water industry in this really important topic, healthy, livable cities. This whole idea that planning can impact health is well recognised now. If you look at the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, Goal 11 is around sustainable cities and communities. Goal 3 is around health. And in fact, if you look across all of the different areas, in terms of city planning and health, it's about 9 goals and 24 targets specifically around this topic. The World Health Organization has said that in order to achieve the sustainable goals, we need to remind ourselves that cities are a critical setting for health, and we should be regarding health as one of the most effective markers of any city's successful sustainable development. So we really need to be putting, I think, health at the centre of all of this. And of course, there's also this global recognition. This is also WHO, the World Health Organization, talking about the recognition for active cities, cities that create environments that really encourage people to be as physically active as they can. And the reason why is that, just for a second, just think about this. Every 2 seconds, there's a death that's associated with chronic disease. So during the course of my talk, how many is that going to be? And 40% of these are preventable. And that's when we say they're preventable, they're people who are younger than 70 years. So these are avoidable deaths. So a large number of deaths are caused by preventable diseases, diseases that could be reduced if we were more physically active. And of course, as we just heard, and the reason why the water sensitive city has got CRC was set up in the first place, is rapid urbanisation and population growth. Melbourne's going to reach 8 million. I know we've got to pause with COVID, but nevertheless, it'll still continue to grow. And if we were just on track, that was going to mean another 1.6 million new residences by 2050. And this is a remarkable it's a remarkable growth, and you can see the pressures it's putting on all of our systems. It's the increasing traffic congestion. It's been estimated by Infrastructure Australia that on current figures, COVID accepted, it was going to cost us $53 billion by 2030 under a business as usual. So people continue to drive at the same rate. But I think importantly, from a climate change perspective, transport is 19% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's our third largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So looking at ways that we can get people out of their cars and using alternatives is really critical. And of course, with population growth and urbanisation, Australia's already very urbanised, it's still putting a lot of pressure on our resources and infrastructure, including our water resources. But of course, the biggest thing that's really challenging us is climate change. And from a health perspective, it's been argued that climate change is the greatest global health threat facing the world in the 21st century. This is The Lancet. It's the most prestigious medical journal in my field, but it's one of the greatest threats to human health. But on the other hand, if we get this right, if we actually do act, it's one of the greatest opportunities to redefine the social and environmental determinants of health. And that's really where I've dedicated most of my career to, thinking about these environmental determinants of health. But of course, this is becoming much, much, much more urgent now. We have a climate emergency. And as we've gone through the last summer or last year, we know just what a pressure that put us all under. It's official. Climate's warming, rainfall's declining. But if we think of it from a health perspective, in 2009, in the dreadful Black Saturday fires in Melbourne and Victoria, there were 173 deaths from people who were tragically taken in those fires. There were 374 deaths associated with heat stress. 374 associated with heat stress. So as our temperature rises, this is going to become even more important. And that's a big issue when we look at the way we're building our outer suburban areas. This is outer suburban Melbourne, houses almost touching each other, very little green space. But even in our established areas, this is a big issue from a health perspective, because as we're densifying our cities, this is to sites in an established area. You can see there's quite a lot of greenery, there's quite a lot of trees, but this is from South Australia actually, and they're very concerned about it there, which is a very hot city. But this is what it looks like once the big, we do the infill development, the densification, the infill development that goes on. We're losing all that green space and tree canopy, and this is massive. So this is actually occurring all across the country, and so in terms of heat stress, this is a really huge issue. But of course, the problem with heat stress as well, it's not just humans that are suffering, it's also our wildlife. This was a really distressing headline that was in the Age on January 29th, 2019. 2,000 flying foxes were perished during the heat wave. Really shocking. And of course, what we've seen, of course, with the fires last year was massive biodiversity destruction and loss due to the fires. Really distressing images that we were confronted with. But also from a health perspective, the other thing is not just about ecosystems health and heat stress, but also the air pollution that came. Actually, air pollution during the fires, the PM 2.5 levels reached 100 micrograms per cubic metre in parts of Sydney, and this is classed as hazardous. It was the same thing in Victoria. Actually, this is the picture from my apartment window in Melbourne. You can hardly see the city. It felt like a city that it felt like we were in London in a fog. That's what it looked like. And of course, air pollution causes 4.2 million deaths globally every year. And this is due to stroke, heat disease, heart disease, lung cancer, acute and chronic respiratory diseases. So, very massive problem. In Australia, every year we have 3,000 deaths that are due to air pollution. And this is on current trajectories, not considering population growth and the impact on cities. So, these are all really critical issues. And in fact, the World Health Organization just last year released a new report arguing that what we need to be doing when we're thinking about health is we need to bring all these agendas together. Chronic disease, climate change, these are all very much related, and we needed to do this by creating healthy environments that would be transformative and improve people's health. So this is a really big issue from a global perspective. Should be a really big issue here in Melbourne, and I'm pleased to say that it probably is in Australia. We're thinking about it more and more. More work is being done all the time. In fact, our health department here in Melbourne has tackling climate change and its health impacts as one of its top priorities, and rightly so, because the health impacts are going to be massive, and we need to try and both mitigate but also adapt to a changing climate. So, of course, what's the role then for the water industry? And I know you already know this. This was a fantastic report that was prepared for the Water Services Association of Australia by Frontier Economics. It's a wonderful report. And it argued that there are a number of opportunities for the water community because of all your assets. You can improve recreational opportunities. You can help reduce heat island effects. You can improve air quality. You can increase active recreation. I've put opportunities there because I'm going to be talking to you about, well, how do we measure these opportunities? You can increase passive recreation opportunities. But I think that what was missed a little bit, that increasingly we're seeing in terms of the health impacts, biodiversity is so important. You can help protect and enhance biodiversity. You can increase opportunities for active travel. This is something that was a recommendation of the report. And you can actually reduce inequalities in access to recreational opportunities because your assets go across a whole city. So there's lots of opportunities for the water industry to play in creating healthy, livable communities. And these are really important roles, not to be understated. Now, in thinking about the role of the water industry and where you could go to next, you've got the report that talks about it. I know you think these things are important. The thing is, I know that you have to tackle work with your you have to pay for this. So how do you get social license? And I wanted to talk to you about a report that we did and just reflect on this to see if any of this could be relevant to you as an industry. We did this report, which we published in 2017. It was a national report. We looked at we mapped urban policy implementation, and we looked at evidence-based national livability indicators. And what we were really trying to do was to show where in the cities did we have the policy frameworks in place to deliver healthy, livable cities, and if we did have policies, were they being implemented? Who was getting access to those interventions, and where were the gaps? So we took the view that in thinking about livability, when we started all this, is what gets measured gets done. And that's my message to you as an industry. It's great to have these aspirations and it's great to sort of see your role in it, but what gets measured gets done. We were interested in, are we creating a livable city for all? And I'll show you just a couple of maps. I'm not going to go through these because I want to focus on your industry. We defined what livability was. We said that it was safe and socially cohesive and inclusive. It was environmentally sustainable. So we've got to have sustainable cities if we want to have a future. And yes, we have affordable housing, but it's no point providing affordable housing if it's not linked to public transport, walking and cycling infrastructure, to employment, to education, public open space, all the things we need for daily living. So this was our definition of livability, and we started to measure it. So I'm only going to show you one. So we've measured Melbourne's walkability. And it's quite telling when we start to do this because actually the pattern I'm going to show you for Melbourne is the same as the pattern all over the country. And what we see here, anything that is green is pretty good. The darker the green, the better. And what you see here, of course, is a map that shows you quite clearly that in Melbourne, where we've got walkable communities, places where people can walk to shops and services nearby, where there's enough density, that there's that will actually service those shops and where the streets are connected is mainly really in inner Melbourne, which is the darker colours, and then in the middle suburbs. Once you start to get out to the outer suburban area, you can bet that most people are going to be driving. In fact, anything from 6 to 1, that 1 to 6 on that legend on the right is actually where you expect people to be driving a lot. It's only really in the inner city where you get people walking for transport, because there's nowhere to walk to in the outer suburban areas. Now, why show you this? We didn't just stop there when we did this work. We wanted to give this data out to the community. So we've created the Australian Urban Observatory. And on this website were all of the things that we've measured in terms of measuring livability. We have indicators, like I've just showed you, where local government can go in and can drill down, or state government can go down and look in their community. So for free, you can get access to the local government area, but for a fee, you can actually go down and join as a partner, and you can get sub LGA. And what we want to do with this is we want to benchmark and we want to monitor cities over time to see how well we are doing. Now, when we come to your what you see are the health benefits of a water-centric livable community, the question I ask myself is, how can you use what we've learned by showing where the baseline is and where you're going to actually demonstrate the impact that you're having through your water assets? Again, taking the view, what gets measured gets done, and what are the implications for the water industry? So one of the features of our indicators is they're all evidence-based. We didn't just make these up. All the indicators we've got in our observatory are all based on indicators that are associated with health. And we did a huge number of studies. I piled those studies up on the side, and that's because we did a huge number of studies to test those out. It wasn't just that they're academically interesting and rigorous, they were also policy relevant. We wanted to make sure that they spoke to the policymakers we were trying to influence. So, for example, one of the indicators that we found for transport, that people have access to a public transport stop within a walkable distance, but also that there's a frequent service. This predicted people walking more than just having an accessible public transport stop. So, and this is really highly policy relevant because one, the metrics that we use for the distance to the public transport were based on policy, and then New South Wales has a policy that says that there should be a frequent service. So we wanted to make sure that they spoke to policy, and we wanted to say to people, we need to be doing better here. We're not doing so well. So two things: evidence-based, policy relevant. The other thing that I think is important for you as an industry is thinking about how you can measure these consistently we've done it consistently across all the 21 cities. What can you learn from that? Is it possible to do some national benchmarking and monitoring so that you can actually set up and monitor what's going on nationally? We wanted to make it so it was repeatable. So we were able to use data that allows us to repeat this. And so the other thing that we did was we made it scripted. So it's not difficult to produce the indicators now that we've got them developed. Just to give you a sense of this, we have this for every residential parcel in the 21 cities. We have indicators. So it's a pretty huge data set. And what we wanted to do was design this so we could monitor over time. So this is the approach that we've taken, which I think that you could be thinking about in your own field. For example, what gets measured gets done. Well, you've talked about that it's important that people have access to green infrastructure, and you'll provide opportunities for recreation. You may not easily be able to measure the number of people using it, but you could be looking at the percentage very easily, the percentage of residents who have accessible green spaces from your water assets, just to sort of show the impact that you're having as an industry, particularly as I know in Melbourne, there's an effort to open up the 33,000 hectares. Melbourne Water's opening up the 33,000 hectare and making it available for community use. So what could you do then to demonstrate that as a result of the work at this point and over time, what percentage of residents have access to green spaces from water assets? And then you can track, also importantly, I noticed in that report that's been put out by the industry, is that it's important to try and target low-income areas, and this is completely important from a health point of view. People who are in lower-income areas tend to have poorer health profiles, so encouraging people to be physically active in low-income areas, providing them with opportunities, creating tree canopy is incredibly important. So you can track changes over time in access in low-income areas. You could be doing things like kilometres of walking trails that you have along your water assets, and in particular cycling trails. But importantly, I just add here, we've seen with COVID how important it is to make those wide enough so that you've got safe opportunities for safe walking and safe cycling. Personally, I prefer separated cycle trails for the fast cyclists, particularly if, as was recommended by that report, you want to target to increase active transport, which is quite important, I think, for the potential of your industry to contribute to providing cycling trails along your assets. The percentage of tree canopy that's produced that's by your assets. I think that's a really important question. You may have seen Astelbert and Feng, Thomas Astelbert and Xiaoqi Feng, just published last year, an important piece of work which showed that people who live in areas where there's 30% or more tree canopy had a decreased risk of hypertension, diabetes, and dementia. These are really important figures. We don't quite know the mechanism, but I think you have assets, you are planting all the time. You could be showing the contribution that you make to helping to prevent disease through tree canopy. Heat island effects. What's the impact of your assets on helping to reduce heat island effects? Using sensors to measure some of these, and then you can have indicators that you could show across cities the contribution that you're making. And of course, you haven't picked this up, but obviously you play a major role in protecting and enhancing biodiversity. So is it possible to come up with indicators? This is not my area of expertise, but to measure this and monitor over time the contribution that you're making, both birds, but also to frogs, all the sort of biodiversity that we need in a city to keep us healthy and our ecosystems healthy. So I want to come back to the question that I started with in devising my talk. Creating healthy, livable cities, what role is there for the water industry? And I think your topic, water sensitive practice every day, every city, is really something that I'd like to emphasize. And that's what I've tried to say is what's really needed here is a national approach to benchmarking and monitoring our cities. This is not a dress rehearsal. On our watch, cities are growing. We've got growing demand for infrastructure. Cities are contributing 75% of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's harming our habitats and our ecosystems. The planet's warming and biodiversity is being lost, and the health and well-being of people, our ecosystem, and the planet is really at risk. So what we recommended when we did our report, which may be relevant for you, and I think it is irrelevant to you if you're tackling this and you're saying this is what you can contribute. We need to have evidence-informed policies. There's no point just plucking something out of the sky and just using practice. There's lots of evidence now that can tell us how we should be framing our policies, and we need evidence-informed policies. We need medium, in terms of your industry, short, medium, and long-term targets for the contributions you're going to make to health and well-being. I know that's maybe challenging because you've got to put yourself on the line and say, well, what do you want to achieve? But you can have a long-term target and work towards achieving it. I think the spatial indicators are very powerful. They allow you to benchmark where are we at now, and actually with your targeting, saying where do we need to get to. They also show, if you're trying to demonstrate your impact, what role that you could play in contributing to metropolitan governance through the work that you're doing as an industry. I don't know about you, but when I look at young people and I watch them protesting about climate change, the important role that we need to play, and asking older adults, what are you doing? This is happening on your watch. What are we doing? I'm not sure about you, but it really sharpens attention to me that we need to do better as people who are researchers, in my case, people who are actually building the city and making a contribution. And in closing, I just want to leave this with you. You may not be touched by those young people. I know I am, and I have to answer to some young people in my family. But the one person that really keeps me honest and makes me want to do better in the way we're doing this work is my little niece here. This is Viola. She was dressed up on her day. She was asked to go to a school dressed up as her superhero. She dressed up as her older affected by the decisions we make in our professional lives. I'm sure you have a viola that is important to you, and I think we need to do better. I know you're trying, and all I'm suggesting to you is that maybe benchmarking, monitoring over time will actually help to keep us all on track to deliver the cities we need for the health and well-being, not only of human health, but also for ecosystem and planetary health. So thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Billie. That was absolutely fascinating. And one of the things that strikes me is that we have a real opportunity to connect some of the benchmarking work and tools that we've been developing at the CRC with the Australian Urban Observatory. So we've developed a water sensitive cities index that sets out, a framework of goals and indicators that capture all the benefits of a water sensitive city across social, technical, ecological domains. And we've also been developing an integrated performance evaluation framework for assessing at a site scale and a precinct scale the integrated performance of places. And it seems like such an incredible opportunity for us to start linking in with some of the spatial indicators that have that history of data and a forward-looking projection to be able to start strengthening and further developing some of that benchmarking insight that Australian cities are now using. So I think we've had more than 50 cities around Australia have been benchmarked with the Water Sensitive Cities Index, and we can start to get some really tailored health lens and livability lens across some of those. How is the Australian Urban Observatory indicators? How are they being used in the health sector and by governments at the moment?
Well, they're being used at a number of different levels. So local government use them to benchmark and monitor their local government areas. They don't include the environmental sustainability indicators, and they don't include some of the indicators that I've just mentioned, like tree canopy, that sort of thing. But I suppose the local government's using them, the federal government's use them in their national performance framework. And in Victoria, the state government's been talking about as a potential way that they could be using, they've recommended to themselves that they look to our indicators as a way of benchmarking the implementation of Plan Melbourne, for example. So other cities could be doing the same thing because they've been designed to speak to policy. So they're not, they're health related, but they're also policy related. And I think that's really important in terms of getting the uptake by government and other sort of agencies. But I think the key thing is that to be able to sort of show what happens over time when you put in a concerted effort to try and change things is really the key thing, is that it allows you to benchmark and monitor and then see where you need to do better. And because you've got such aspirations, I think there's a real opportunity there for your industry.
Absolutely. Jamie, I believe we've got a question in the chat line.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Billie. Great keynote. Thank you so much. I helped Billie sort of frame up what it was going to be about, and she's exceeded expectations, so well done, Billie. A question that came through in the chat, this is from Ross Allen in our Victorian hub. He's watching today and helping us facilitate. He points out that just because something is important doesn't automatically mean it gets measured. Some things are really hard to measure, particularly in something as complex as livability. So I suppose the question is around that of what do we need to make sure we don't forget about? What sort of issues about livability are going to be hard to measure, but we should keep our eye on the ball? And any sort of thoughts on what we should do next around that?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, one of the things we've said is that what's important from a livability perspective will be things like socially cohesive and inclusive, and they are actually hard to, anything that is actually, what's hard, really particularly hard to measure is anything that's related to what the experience of the people who live there. What we find easy to measure, not easy, I mean, but what we find we can measure relatively easily is the built form. So that's relatively easy to measure. But there's other things to do with the lived experience of people, which is much harder to measure because it requires surveys. It requires us to ask people, and if you wanted to do that in 21 cities across the country, that's very difficult. I'd like to notice sort of here what I think these are all research questions. Actually, if it's hard to measure, then these are the sorts of things that we need to put some effort into looking at. Well, how can we measure that? And now with growing focus on sensors, which are really taking off, there's going to be more increasingly opportunities to measure things in a different way with AI and all the sort of technology that's coming on board. So I think there's some wonderful opportunities to tackle some of those hard things to measure, but by using technology.
Great. Look, I had a follow-up question of my own, Billie, which might be, are there any other sectors who are doing this sort of thing well? So the water sector has been around for quite a long time and is very efficient at what it does, and we're now starting to push the boundaries of what water does in cities. But there's always that chance to look beyond our own, outside of our bubble, if you like, and say, is there another sector in cities that is starting to think about livability we should be working more closely with? And you mentioned local government, but there might be others as well. So I suppose, is there any inspiration you can give us there?
I think everyone seems to be. I think the nice thing about livability is it speaks to a lot of people, and it's a really great concept. From a health point of view, when I talk about livability, all the things I say that make a livable community, these are the social determinants of health. We make decisions all the time in our cities about what policies we implement and who's going to get access to the opportunities or the interventions that we distribute. These are the social determinants of health. So from a health point of view, it's important. But, of course, transport talk about livability. All the sectors are actually talking about livability. Mayors love to talk about the livability of their community. It's just such a great concept. I think that there's lots of opportunities for you to work with, because obviously water and water assets are critical to the livability of our cities, as is climate change and the adaptation and mitigation. This will determine whether cities are livable or not, and the heat that we'll have in cities, we're already experiencing in cities, can be mitigated to some extent. It allows us to adapt if we can harness your assets that you have through the water industry to help mitigate and adapt to a changing climate.
Billie, one of the challenges and I guess areas that we've given a lot of attention to at the CRC has been around collaborative and integrated planning. So the great integrated vision of a water sensitive city has the pathways through different agencies and sectors to be actually then implemented on the ground. I wondered if you had any reflections from a health sector perspective. We haven't had a huge participation from very specific health departments, although we have had some. How would you describe where the health sector is at and what the opportunities are for, areas that need to have that better kind of collaboration and integration with the water sector?
I think it's actually really, I think it's everyone's, the health sector, obviously it's focused mainly it focuses on illness. Actually, it's not really a health sector, it's mainly an illness sector, the illness care sector, which is a real tragedy. But it has climate change as a focus of its priority now in the Health and Wellbeing Plan, which is a good sign. The World Health Organization has just published a report on biodiversity and health, making the point that biodiversity has a major impact on health, and with infectious disease and vector-borne diseases, these will all come from potentially come from water assets. So I would have thought that they'd be quite interested in this, but I think the whole area of integrated planning, we know in our work, you're never going to create a livable city unless we get integration of infrastructure, of transport and land use planning. It's like the $64,000 question. Everyone knows it's important, but it's really hard nut to crack. And we are seeing examples of where we're delivering integrated planning. New South Wales, for example, now with the approach that it's taking, trying to get integration from local, state, federal, this sort of integrated planning vertically, but you also need it horizontally across all the different departments. My personal view is that something like livability should live within the Premier's office, the Mayor's office and the Prime Minister's office, and they should be asking each of their departments, what role are you playing in terms of creating a livable, sustainable city? Because each of the departments contribute in a way to it. So I would argue that what we need to be doing is right into the premiers, mayors, and prime ministers of our country to sort of say that we need a different approach, because everyone knows we need to do it. It's just harder to do. And when something like livability lives in the planning departments, it won't achieve its full potential, because planners can draw a plan, but they can't populate the plan. They can say that a school needs to go there or the park needs to go there, but they don't populate the plan. It actually needs everyone to work together to create the cities that we need and want. So it's a real challenge, I admit, but I think we just need to keep on working at it, because there's no other way forward. We have to actually change the way we're doing things. We need to transform. And in fact, that's what the WHO report was about, is how do we transform the way we're doing things to produce health and wellbeing, because that's really what it's going to require.
Thanks, Billie. That sounded like a concluding remark, but I do have one other question before we sort of run out of time. This has come from the live audience in our South Australian venue. The question's posted by Melissa Bradley. She asks, have conversations started with health departments about health budget investment in urban greening? And I suppose you could expand that out to transport budgets and other things as well, but it's that cross-sector investment, I suppose, which will be the next step in what you've just talked about. So, yeah, any
I think that we
examples
need to, actually, I think it needs to be the other way around. To be honest, I mean, I don't think it's helpful to have a discussion and expect the health budget. If you can imagine, in South Australia, just to give you a sense of this, it was worked out that the health budget was going to take just the health budget as it is, because of chronic disease, was going to overtake the state budget, because health is so expensive. We all pay for health through our tax. We don't need health to be paying for it. We need to get everyone to do their job to create health and well-being. Some argue, I try not to argue this, but it is an important one, that we should have our health in all policies. That everyone, that's the sort of the mantra for the WHO, health in all policy. Everyone has a job to play in promoting health. It can't be the health sector. Health sector is really the illness sector. So it's never going to pay for urban greening. It might, it should sit at the table to encourage people who are responsible for urban greening to do better, and people who are responsible for transport to do better. But each sector has its role to play, and mainly, unfortunately, in the health sector, it's mainly 99% of the budget goes in hospitals, fixing people up when they're sick, or, illness care, rather than actually prevention. And prevention is got to be done by all the sectors outside of health. And it's interesting, actually, the UN put out a report, had a series of reports now on chronic disease, and it made the point on a global perspective that unless we can do something about curbing chronic disease, preventable diseases, the ones that people die of prematurely, we will see the health system will actually get will actually destroy the health system, as same as we've seen with COVID, because it cannot keep up, won't be able to keep up with demand. It's going to cost us all. So what they argued is that this is not a health problem, a health sector problem. This is a societal problem, and we all have a role to play. We need to get all the sectors contributing their bit to health rather than expecting health to pay for it. It's the other way around. They need to be doing their jobs better. We need to be empowering them and give them another reason to do this. That health, planetary health, environmental health, ecosystem health are all of our business. We all need to take some responsibility for achieving that. So yeah, sorry to give you the lecture, but that part's a really important one for me, is that this is not something the health sector can deal with. What the work you do will promote health and well-being. If you do it, you're able to deliver on what you can see the aspiration for your field. You will make a really important contribution. And every sector needs to look like that, because we're all paying in our taxes. It doesn't need the health sector to be paying for it. It needs us all to be doing our jobs better to deliver the cities we need.
Thanks, Billie. A key message of the whole of society, whole of government responsibility, and an integrated collaborative approach to delivery. Look, Billie, thank you so much for your insights and reflections. It's been a great morning session, and we look forward to further conversation about some potential collaboration from an indicator data and benchmarking perspective. Thanks, Billie.
Okay.
I'll now throw to Jamie in Melbourne.
Thank you, Bryony, and thank you, Billie. Again, a fantastic keynote, helping to put the rest of the conference into some perspective and also talk about where next. I'd like to welcome back Ben, our CEO, for a quick announcement. Ben, what have you got to tell us?
Well, Jamie, thank you very much. We've got one more important matter of business before we take a short break, and that is to announce the winner of our Water Sensitive City Award for 2021. And that's the award for the location that has the highest score on the Water Sensitive City Index since our last conference. And it's my great pleasure to announce that the winner of the Water Sensitive City Award for 2021 is Armidale in WA. And I think we've got just a few words of response from the team at Armidale. We just cross to them now.
Hi, I'm Neil. I'm the Environmental Manager at the City of Armidale. Hope everyone's enjoying the conference. We're really thrilled to get this award, and I guess we just really want to thank a couple of organisations that have provided a lot of support. First off, really want to thank the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities for providing the award and also for doing all the fantastic research that they've completed over the last 5 to 10 years. Secondly, the Water Corp have been fantastic in terms of providing support to the city with the workshop and the resultant report. So yeah, the city's really grateful. And look, from our perspective, it's really good recognition for the excellent work that a lot of the officers do and the team in Armidale do in relation to water sensitive matters. And I guess as well, we have a very supportive council that enables us to do that. So look, enjoy the conference. Thanks for listening to me. And yeah, have a great time. Cheers, bye.
Great, congratulations again, Armidale, and we'd like to offer our thanks to the Water Corporation in WA for sponsoring that indexing activity, and for the team at Herb Aqua, Shelley Shepherd and the team at Herb Aqua for delivering it. So there you have it. That's this session in the can, wrapped up. We'll be back in a short little while for the next stage, and we'll refer you to your program for your next state-based activity. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.